All right. Well, we still got people coming in here, but I don't want to delay too long because we got a packed agenda today. So, thanks everybody for jumping on to the first of our four-class masterclass series here today with Ryan Townsley. Give you a quick intro to Ryan, then go through what to expect from this series, and then do a quick intro that'll kind of kick off Ryan's presentation for today. So really excited and grateful that Ryan Townsley could join us today to lead this masterclass. Ryan is founder and lead advisor at Town Capital. He was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, as we just heard, East Coast guy. Served in the U.S. Naval Nuclear Power Program from '03 to '09, and worked as a commercial nuclear power engineer, radiation protection supervisor, and licensed senior reactor operator for 13 years. So I imagine we could do some master classes on that too someday. um, uh, Ryan completed an MBA and discovered the world of personal finance and followed his passion to helping his colleagues retire from nuclear power. And that's why he started Town Capital, the only financial planning firm in the world created exclusively for nuclear power plant professionals. He now manages over 110 million and for about 80 households, and has a heavy focus on retirement income and tax planning, which is the topic of this masterclass. We've got 4 sessions. Today is a tale of 2 bear markets. Next week, we're going to talk about next level tax planning. Then it'll be a 2-week jump to best practices in presenting retirement income plans, and then another 2 weeks for advisor and practice management efficiency. So just to, make sure that you've got your calendar set for those. It's going to be awesome. So I'm very excited about it.
Me too.
So in order to kind of kick this off, Ryan asked that I kind of set the stage because we're hosted by Income Lab. Ryan's going to be using a lot of the Income Lab software to display some of the concepts. So we thought it would make sense to do a little bit of a high level intro to what's different about doing retirement planning with Income Lab. So that for those of you who aren't already Income Lab users, you kind of can follow along without just thinking like, what the heck are they talking about here? So I wanted to start with kind of the highest level, which is really what it is that retirees want. What are we trying to do? How are we trying to help people in retirement? And there is work on this. And then I imagine the hundreds of people on this call and thousands of clients that you've represented would have some feelings on this as well. But if you ask people about kind of their life goals and things, they typically can sort of line up on the side of live the best life I can. You can get that either in a positive or a negative way. So you will get things like don't be a burden on my kids, don't run out of money, and so on. But if you kind of dial into like what is a good life in retirement, it tends to be, hey, help me live the best life I can with the resources I have and the years in health that I'm given. Right. So it's this kind of help me navigate the world with the resources that I have. Help me make good decisions on this so that I can live the best life I can. You don't tend to get many people saying, well, my primary goal is to leave money behind when I die. You can ask them, hey, do you want to leave some money behind? You'll get them to give you a number, but it's not usually the top priority. Another thing that I heard from a lot of advisors when we were first building Income Lab was, oh, I used to ask people, hey, how much would you like to spend in retirement? And often the answer would be, well, how much can I have? Right? Because no one asks you in your working years, hey, how much would you like to spend? They just say, well, this is what the job pays. Do you want it or not? Right? And then you build a life within that. As my grandma says, just spend less than you make. That's how you live. The problem is in retirement, it's not entirely clear what you quote unquote make. And so that's the first question advisors have to answer in retirement planning is what can I afford to spend? And we do that through, complicated analysis and so on, as our clients expect us to. And you could think of it as, all right, well, there's a lot of ways the world could go for you, right? Your returns could be good or bad, inflation could be good or bad. If it's a couple, you might both be long-lived or somebody might not be. There's a whole range of ways the world could go. And it kind of feels like people want the best answer to that question, what can I afford to spend? And if I ask you, well, what's the most likely amount I could afford to spend if I lined up all the possible worlds you could live through and how much you could spend in each world, you would say, well, it's right there, obviously, right? It's right in the middle. That's the most likely amount. Doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but it's the most likely amount. Now, we have depended for the last 20 plus years, maybe closer to 30 at this point, years on this concept of probability of success in retirement. And I know Ryan will be talking a little bit about the shift away from that. So it's worthwhile asking, okay, what is the probability of success of that spending level, of the spending level that's most likely right for these folks? Well, it's 50. Which that should be incredibly shocking. Like you would never present a plan to a client saying, hey, this one's great. It's a coin flip. Instead, by using probability of success, we tell clients, hey, this is how you should think about the world. You should think about it in terms of probability of success. And it's a 0 to 100 score. Well, what score do they want? They want 100, right? So where's 100 on here? It's all the way over on the left. It's the spending level where in 100% of the ways that the world could go, they could have spent more. In other words, it is 100% chance of underspending. In other words, probability of success, that word success doesn't mean what clients think it means. As I just went over, success means do the best I can, live a great life, have, just the most fulfilling life I can with the resources I have and the time and health that I'm given. So richness of life tends to be about time with family and friends and, what's in the book Die with Zero, the author calls memory dividends, right? Building up this set of memories and experiences that continue kind of paying you dividends. What success means in probability of success is spend as little as possible, leave a lot of money behind when you die. Now, I'll shift over to the app here to show you a little bit of how we deal with that problem of probability of success, driving people not toward kind of optimizing or maximizing their life, but toward underspending and regret and worrying about it while you do. So what you see in Income Lab is taking head on the question of, given what I have, what can I spend? So these folks have, almost $3 million, but they have other resources too. This is the key thing to retirement spending is it's not just about your portfolio, it's about everything else that you can use to fund your lifestyle. So all told, whether it's, with Social Security, pensions, and so on, we're seeing that they can spend $19,600 a month. But they're not going to fail in retirement. Instead, the advisor will be monitoring the world as time goes on and letting them know when an adjustment would make sense. So for them, if their account goes up a bit, they'll be able to spend more. That's great. Start knocking off some bucket list items. What people tend to care more about is when would they have to spend less. And we can see here that there's a pretty good gap before they would have to tap the brakes on their spending. But crucially, that brake tapping is not the end of the world for them. It's $1,000 a month reduction in spending, about 5%. So this really helps advisors talk with clients about how retirement really works, which is it's a journey. It's a journey where you have this incredible superpower to make adjustments along the way to keep your life on track, both to make sure that you're optimizing and living the best life you can if things are better than expected, but also to make sure that on the downside, you're able to adjust and kind of keep things on track, typically through relatively minor and temporary adjustments rather than through failure, financial ruin, and things like that. So that's, I think, a very high-level view of how Income Lab views retirement planning and retirement spending. There's much, much more to the app, and I know Ryan will go over some of that, but that's a nice intro. So Ryan, over to you.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. Hello, everybody. Very, very excited to show you exactly over the next 4 classes how I use Income Lab in my firm. Like Justin said, I manage it's about $120 million now for about 80 some households. The vast majority would be retirees. So we're going to go through during this class kind of, I call it a tale of two bear markets. And just a funny story about this is progressively like my best attempt at me trying to make AI photos of two different bear markets. And so I made one and I said, no, make it meaner. And the next one was that. And then I said, no, well, in the spirit of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, two bear markets, and they gave me two bears dressed like Charles Dickens characters. So I thought that was hilarious. But as we move through, of course, for anybody watching this that's not licensed, this isn't investment, tax, or financial planning advice. And like Justin mentioned, I do run the only financial planning firm in the world created exclusively for nuclear power plant professionals. And there's 3 promises I can make you watching this webinar, this series, right? I really do encourage you to watch all 4 parts because it's the what you'll take away from all of them will be greater than the sum of their parts. But I did the graphics myself, so they're going to be bad, right? I use terrible. I'd say I give myself a little more credit, but they'll be bad. I definitely spelled at least one thing wrong. And the content will be pretty good, though. So if you can get over the production value, I think you'll take a lot away from the actual content itself. Right? I opened my firm in 2019. I did not have any experience. So I left the nuclear power production world after working there for almost 20 years. I got a master's in finance and was really studying financial planning kind of on the side because I wanted to make a career shift. And just naturally, making that shift and wanting to serve, I wanted to stay connected to my old industry. And I wanted to serve the people that I saw as really, really smart people in the nuclear industry, some of the smartest I ever met. But also like making maybe decisions that weren't the best when it came to their money. And that was intriguing to me. And I wanted to be able to provide them better service. So just basically due to the demographics of the industry, and it's a more seasoned industry. It's a really nice way of saying it's an aging or an older industry. My focus would tend to be on retirees, right? Just naturally, a very large portion of that industry is retiring in the next decade or less. And my clients saved well, right? They worked at the power plant for 40 years, some of them. Average family, about 1 to 2 million in retirement funds alone. Some more, few with less, but some with less. And in general, they just, like Justin mentioned, they wanted to be able to live their life, travel, hang out with their grandkids, do all the fun stuff. Didn't have big desires to leave any money in particular, although, there's always ways to leave someone something, and we'll talk about that. But of course, I started my retirement planning journey by using probability of success, right? And just due to that inherent nature, like Justin said, right, just think about how we've been taught our entire lives. Grades, standardized testing, survival rates, anything that we're talking about that has a probability, we tend to naturally, whether consciously or subconsciously, just lean towards higher is better. We just do, right? So it's not necessarily a fault of the program. It's just how we've been wired for a very long time is that a higher number is always better, right? So, and I thought that myself. Now there's ways to talk to clients, of course, about, higher isn't necessarily better. There kind of is a sweet spot. And depending on your goals, higher might be better if you're more conservative. Higher might be better if you do want to leave a big legacy, right? There's other reasons where higher might be better. But in general, if you don't give any context, I think for the most part, your clients are going to assume that the higher you make that number, the better, until you convince them otherwise, right? And most of the programs that use probability of success use color coding, right? So you can see just naturally, the color coding tends to drive you towards to feel a particular way if you're in that color code, right? If you're in the big range, we'll call it for this one, the red range, you think you probably got work to do, right? If you're in that green range, you think you're probably good to go. And if you're in the blue, you're either really good to go, which is where you want to be, maybe based on your goals or personality, or maybe just you're a little too good. Maybe the plan is a bit too conservative, right? So in general, this color coding automatically, whether, again, without adding context, will make clients feel a particular way when they look at it. especially when they see where their probability of success lines up in those color codes. So this is basically, if you're here, that feels great, right? That's a win. You have done fantastic. And if you're here, that feels pretty good. You know that you're not, pegged out. You know that there's definitely risk in the plan. But if you have this bottom plan right here that's at 50, just inherently being at 50%, it's not a passing grade, if you will, if you were to put a grade on it, and it's clearly in the red zone, you would think that that would be very risky to spend in that capacity. So my clients naturally gravitated between either making their plans land in the green zone, or if they were, it's very high correlation, I'd say probably 0.99 on clients who were more conservative in their investment risk tolerance, also more conservative in our retirement planning, where they wanted their probability of success to be in the blue zone. So if a client was more conservative in their investments, I could pretty much predict that they would want to see that 98, 99% on their retirement plan. They also recognize that the lower the number, the more likely they would run out of money. And of course, we don't frame it that way, and we don't want to frame it that way, that you're going to run out of money. What that means is if you don't take action, you're going to run out of money. But just the inherent way that the programs tend to present, right? Especially if you look at, and we're going to look at this later, like a bad timing type of scenario, things like that, it literally says run out of money, right? Now that's assuming you're just along for the ride, and that you as the advisor and the client are just going to let that happen, which you're not. But when you let people's emotions and their thoughts kind of run away with them, that tends to be, again, without context, where they would think that all of these other things that are not successes inherently would have to be failure because it's the counterpart. All right. So, just remember, basically, I wanted to recap this graph. This is something I use client facing. You guys are welcome to have it after this, Ashley, if you want to send it out. But this is just philosophically the difference between how your standard 4% rule type spending plan would work. You've got your initial retirement income, you adjust it for inflation from the time that you retire until the end of your plan, and that's it, right? The problem is nobody spends money that way, or at least they don't want to. In that the vast majority of people want to have a little more income in the beginning, some a lot more income, depends on your personality. That way you can build those memories and those things that we talked about. You can have the experiences, you can take the trip, you can, do the things for the grandkids, right? And then typically in your middle of life, you tend to slow down a bit. It does not mean that you're still not keeping up with raising cost of living, but maybe at that point you're not taking a 1-for-1 because it's being offset. The amount that cost of living is going up is being offset by the amount that you are slowing down. And then usually you have a little bit of a tail up at the end of life, just because at that point the car needs a little more maintenance, right? You've got to spend a little more on your healthcare and things like that, right? So if you overlay these two, you get where you have more income in the beginning and a little less income at the end. The interesting thing from a math perspective, though, is that the area underneath of these two, which would be the total spending, is probably pretty close to being the same. You're just moving the spending profile and shifting it either slightly, moderately, or more aggressively, which income allows you to do, towards the front of your life. Right. Now, there's always trade-off to that, long-term care planning, things like that. We are going to talk about that at length in these this 4-part masterclass, so don't sweat that. We will definitely get to that. But if you look at all of the surveys done with retirees in their 70s and 80s, the vast majority say that they wish they would have done more. It's not that they spent too much. That is one of them. Some do, right? But the vast majority are, I wish I wouldn't have been so conservative in my spending. And I do see it, right? I see people that say, I'll take that trip next year. Let me get acclimated to retirement for a year. And then a year comes up and you say, oh, well, the market's down a little bit. Let me wait till next year. And then that turns into a decade very quick. We all know that, right? So you look back and you have this regret zone where you're in your mid 70s or 80s. You look back and say, man, I really should have taken advantage of my 60s or my 50s whenever you retired. Because now I can't do those things. It could be health, it could be mobility, Could just be energy, right? Or a lot of different things that can change. So what we're really trying to do is maximize the spending in the go-go years, the early years, kind of flatten it out in the slow-go years, and then tail it up in the no-go years if we did have a health issue, which we plan for in here, right? So just general philosophy. Now with that, because you are spending more, you have to be careful, right? So, I was a new advisor helping retirees. The firm had been open about a year. I had a really good client base at that point because of the relationships that I built over 20 years. And then COVID happened, right? Which completely tested, I'd say, my qualitative and quantitative abilities, right? Not only from calculating retirement income, but necessary adjustments, things like that, but also my ability to coach people through this tough time, right? So I'm going to compare kind of my experience during COVID and then my experience during 2022. Now take that with a grain of salt. There's no way that you can compare the stress level of 2022 with 2020, right? Markets both went down, but there was this added thing during 2020 that was a pandemic, health crisis. People were scared for their life, right? So, but this is just the best comparison I can show, at least quantitatively, side by side, apples to apples, portfolio, income, all of those, right? So we're kind of going to have to at least, I don't want to say disregard the other aspects of what we're going on in COVID, but just consider that, this is the only method of comparison that we have, right? So as you know, this was kind of like peak to bottom of COVID. The S&P dropped about, this is called 32%, right? So I just kind of wanted to walk you through a real client, right? Obviously names and things like that change, and how the experience was for them and then, many others during this sequence of events, right? So we had John and Jane Investor. They retired in December 2020. So in hindsight, like if you look at, especially from a probability of success perspective, really bad timing, right? Right before COVID. They were not yet drawing Social Security. They're not eligible. They have about 1.4 million combined in IRAs. They're invested at about a 60-40, and they're spending about $84,000 a year after taxes. So let's just call it $7,000 a month. Now, they retired a little before they wanted to, but they kind of had to. They had a health and some family issues and things like that going on that they wanted to attend to. So they were at 76% probability success, which is really good, right? In the eyes of, if you're using the probability success meter, it's good, right? It's not overly conservative. It doesn't have a ton of cushion. You know that there's some risk in there, but it's in the green zone, right? The green zone is where you want to be when you're using the probability of success. And they knew, based on all of our stress tests, right? Any probability of success Monte Carlo type of software has the ability to show average return versus bad timing. Now I recreated this graph because I didn't want to use anyone else's software's graphs. So it's ugly, but you get the point. You all have seen it before. That bad timing, when you're just along for the ride, meaning you don't have pre-scripted changes and waypoints, if you will, along which you will make changes, really does change the outcome, right? The sequence of your returns in retirement, I would say, matter even more than the actual returns, right? You can get the same actual returns, but the sequence can build you to a drastically different outcome. So this is their bad timing versus average. So they knew that if they had bad timing, that they could potentially run out of money. And obviously, like an advisor, you want to coach them and say, well, you're not going to run out. We're going to make adjustments. But at the bottom of this, in most softwares, it literally says run out of money. So it's really hard for someone to see that and ignore that, right? So let's just kind of follow along. Imagine they have the ability to log into their portal, so they can see their Money Guide Pro, their Right Capital, their whatever their software they're using. It doesn't matter which one. They can see their probability of success, right? And starting February 19th, right, they would have had 76%, which is exactly where we started. So the clients are confident, right? They're not overly confident. Like I said, they retired a little before they wanted to. They knew they didn't have like excessive amounts of margin, but they were very disciplined spenders. So they were comfortable with saying, we know we can stick to our budget, so we're comfortable with retiring with this budget. February 27th, so you can see I plotted just a standard like Vanguard 60-40 alongside the S&P. So we're going to follow the 60-40 because that's where they were invested. And by this time, they were down about, let's just call it 6%. So this is where their probability of success moved to. So not a massive change, probably one you would expect and say, okay, well, that's tolerable, right? Unfortunately, it does dip down into the red zone a little bit, so it's a little worrisome. But if I'm looking at this 76 to 67%, I can say, well, it makes sense that my plan and my outcome changed because I did have a decrease in my assets, right? So, that does make perfect sense. So at that point, clients maybe starting to get a little concerned. They have questions, right? They want to talk about it. And the first question you get from a retiree, at least from the vast majority of my clients, are we okay? Right? Is everything okay? And they want you to provide that comfort, right, that we do as advisors, which is really like one of the most important things, if not the most important thing about our job, is are we okay? And we tell them why and how they are okay in whatever capacity we need to do depending on their personality. So then now we're at March 9th, right? So we're looking at about minus 10%, and they would have fallen to 60% probability of success. So now they're clearly in the red zone, right? And they're starting to think, okay, I'm getting anxious. And now the question isn't, are we okay? It's, do we need to make a change, right? So it typically evolves into like a general question into, okay, give me a yes or no. Like, do we need to take action? And as advisors, we usually give really good advice here, which is typically no, right? Especially from an investment standpoint, stay the course, stay invested, right? Typically people make changes at the wrong time when it comes to investments, right? So, look at history, and we do all kinds of things to comfort our clients. And that's great advice for investments. And we can even maybe take advantage of that. We can rebalance, we can buy some equity on the way down. But how do we answer this question for taking income, right? Making investment changes, you can't control what the market's going to do after that. So your change is purely with you, and then you're at the mercy of the changes you made, where income changes are very easy. They can be changed at any time. And if you're changing income down in any way, it can't have a detrimental impact unless you're changing income to the point where the client can no longer enjoy retirement or pay their bills or other consequences like that. Right? So now it's March 12th, and the 60-40 is down about 15%. And here we are. And this is kind of the magic number. And Justin was talking about this, is if anybody looked at this without the additional description of, the bell curve and the middle spending and shooting for average, I think if you just looked at this and said this, if you gave this to somebody who knew nothing about retirement, said this is your probability of success in retirement, I think they'd be terrified. All right, so you saw this client drop from 76% down to 50%, and it appears that there's no end in sight, right? If you remember COVID, I don't know if it felt like it went fast or slow. It's probably different for everybody, but the market was dropping very fast, and it was terrifying, right? Terrifying for clients and, worrisome for advisors, especially new advisors, right? If you were more seasoned, like I like to say, you might have handled it differently, and that's great. But I think anyone who looked at this would be at least a little concerned by that point. So really what I got is I'm very worried at this point. Now the question evolves from, do we need to make a change? When will we need to make a change? So now they're asking for, okay, things are going south quick. Give me a definitive point where we have to take action. What is that? And when we take action, what will it be? What do I need to do to protect my family? This is a hard question to answer using probability of success. The magnitude of the change needed at that point may be really hard to calculate, because if you're going to adjust the spending back to get to the original probability of success, due to the just inherently the way Monte Carlo works, Monte Carlo, it's also going to include a lot of tests in that Monte Carlo that also have the continuation of really bad markets, including like starting the global financial crisis or the Great Depression from that point, which are going to inherently mean that you're going to have to make a huge change to get back to your original probability of success. So then here we are. This was kind of, let's just call it the bottom ballpark. And remember, these numbers are meant to be close, not exact. But the 60-40 was down about 20.5%, March 20th, and we're at 38%. This is terrifying. So what I heard was, well, there's now a 62% chance, I hope that math works, of running out of money. We'll never recover from this. I should not have retired. And like, that just made me feel like this big as an advisor. I'm like, okay, what can I do to make sure this never happens again? Right? I know in my heart and soul that everything is going to be fine. I know the market's going to recover. I know that from where these clients are spending from, we're not selling equity to fund their retirement or anything. But the fact that they feel this way makes me feel like a failure. I don't ever want a client to feel this way again. It really would have been a better experience if we were able to provide a definitive, predefined plan up front. Here's how things should go, but if they get a little rocky, here's the exact point where we're going to make a change, and here's what the magnitude of that change is going to be. In my opinion, what I've seen working with, out of my 80 clients, I'd say probably like 50 some are retired, and another 20 are like retiring in the next year or two. So it's the vast majority, right? Is that uncertainty, in my opinion, is the biggest driver to fear and anxiety for a retiree. So my question is this a good experience? So multiply that client times 50, probably had about 40 or 50 at the time. Some were a lot less concerned, right? They were like, I know it'll recover, everything's fine. Some were more terrified than this. I would say this was like the average experience, right? And as retirement experts, I think we could do better. I think there's a way to present retirement in a different fashion, and a way to empower clients to be more confident during that, right? So let's take the same client, and let's say all of the conditions are the same, but except for the fact that they're spending a little bit more money here. And the reason why we do that is just that's inherently what Income Lab is meant to do. It's meant to allow them to start at a higher income, but put protective features along the way to make sure that we stay on course and we never get in a position where we're withdrawing too much money to where it becomes unsustainable. That's the whole point of the guardrails, right? So if you log in to Income Lab, right, you see, and let me go to I'll go ahead and pull it up for you. Right, you see what the income plan is going to be. You can change this to be net. You can change it to be annual, right? So that way, you speak in whatever terms the client's comfortable speaking in. I typically provide monthly net. I think that makes the most sense, right? You have a client that's retiring and they take home X amount of dollars per month in their paycheck, and you're telling them that now they can take home X amount of dollars per month in their paycheck. That equates really well, right? And then you see down here, we put guardrails in place, and these guardrails are meant to show you when you're not spending enough money. That's the upside guardrail. You could take out more, or else you're probably going to end your plan with a whole lot, which if that's not your intention, then that's what that's there for. And the downside guardrail, which is always typically much further away, is, okay, at this point, we need to make at least a minor adjustment to your spending for a relatively short amount of time, typically a finite period, to be able to make this plan sustainable. And it defines it right up there, right up front, right? So here's your value. Here's what the portfolio would have to fall to. And over here on the right, here's what the spending you would have to make, the spending cut you would have to make the plan sustainable. All right. So just keep that in mind as we go through, and we'll go through the 2022 now. And interesting enough, I know it's a hard comparison. I probably could do both 2020 versus 22 and just make them all 2020. But I just want you to see that from a market perspective, it really wasn't that different. Right. So if you look at a 60-40, just because of the horrible performance of bonds in 2022, it actually performed just about as bad as the S&P, and almost exactly what the 60-40 did during COVID. So if we start here, this is what our income plan looks like, right? We know that we're taking X amount of dollars per month. This is our value. Here's our guardrails, right? And here's the pay cut we would have to make if we reach that lower guardrail. So then we're here, right? So now we're on January of 2022. We're a couple months in. We're down about 5-6%. So pretty similar start. Now, realize this was over a much longer time frame. I get that. Like I said, this is not a perfect comparison, but I think it's the best one we can make, at least in recent future or recent history. So now we're down, and your income lab, if you were logged in, would not show this value and this value. I want you to see the progression. So you're at one, you start at 1.4 million, and you're down to 1,319,000, and you still have a ton of room left to the guardrail. So if a client logs in and sees this, if they have a copy of this and they're looking at this, instead of seeing a changing probability of success meter, what they're actually seeing is, okay, I've moved closer to my guardrail, but I still have a really good margin away from that guardrail. And even if I do hit the guardrail, I can afford to take this pay cut, right? Because if they're so close that they can't afford to take the pay cut, that may be another conversation in itself of, okay, well, maybe you're spending too much, or maybe you should work longer, you should save more, right? Really what you want to be cutting is discretionary spending. You can't be at the point where you're cutting necessary spending. So this is also a really important planning tool. I'm going to show you a little bit more too. So now we're in May 11th, 2022. We're down about 13% or so. And now here's where we progressed to. So we started here, and now we're down to 1,198. Still plenty of room to the guardrail. So even though that probability of success meter would have been fluctuating at this point, and it would have been all the way down to probably, 50-some%, the guardrail stands steady and gives your clients the stability that they need to say, I am still fine. We've answered all the questions without ever having a conversation with the client. Do we need to make a change? When do we need to make a change? When we hit that point where we do need to make a change, what will the change be? It's all answered up front, never in the moment. And then at the end, this was about the max drawdown, about 21, 22%-ish, and you're here, right? So close to a guardrail. It wouldn't be a surprise if we had to have the conversation, right? Depending on their spending, like this doesn't include really a whole lot of like spending and stuff like that. So that could have driven them even closer. But had they hit the guardrail, they would know exactly, okay, I know what to expect. I know exactly what this pay cut would be. So when Ryan calls me and says, hey, we hit a guardrail, we got to protect your plan, let's make a pay cut of $460 a month, they say, okay, they already know we've discussed it upfront at length. So just think about that. Again, during the entire sequence of events, they knew exactly where they stood. They knew precisely what that line in the sand was, and they knew definitively what the magnitude of the change would be, and that it would be a change that they would be comfortable with. Not that anybody wants to take a pay cut, but in general, if you do have to take a pay cut to protect your plan, you want it to be one that that does not hurt your lifestyle that much, or especially doesn't go into your necessary spending. So just my overall, how I felt in 2020 versus 2022 as a real advisor who manages retirees, who actually use these two different methodologies during these time periods. 2020, I felt very reactive. I was unsure when to make a change and how much. And I know that there are some methodologies where, people do like, and I'll try to articulate this the best I can, but maybe we'll do a little drawing on here. So there are some methodologies where people say, okay, we're starting at 76% with probability of success, but we're going to draw a line here, and we're going to draw a line here, and we're going to say, forgive my bad drawing, we're going to say that if our probability of success gets down to here, we're going to make a change. And if it gets up to here, we're going to make a change. So if it gets up here, we'll spend more. If it gets down here, we'll spend less. The problem is that it's really hard to define that up front. Not even like at what point would that be in the market? Because I think we could predict that a little easier. But what would the magnitude of the spending change be if that happened? I think that's really hard to answer with probability of success. All right. Another thing is from an efficiency standpoint, right? You as the advisor, you have limited time. You're trying to serve as many clients as you can with the highest quality that you can and be as efficient as you possibly can. If you had to monitor plans individually, I don't know of any good way in a probability Monte Carlo type software to monitor plans in mass, right? I just don't know how to do that. So if I have, Joe's plan is dropped by 10% probability of success and Kate's plan dropped by 15, whatever. I wouldn't know that without going into each individual plan and looking at it. So that's very time consuming. It's also very reactive. Like I said, if you look at Income Lab, you actually have a feature in here. Once you implement a plan, so implement a plan means you've done your planning and you actually put it to action. Your client is actually living in retirement, taking income, and you've got your linked accounts, right? You can link your custodian accounts in here and other types of accounts. So it tracks the values and it will actually notify you right here on this needing attention section when you need to make a change. Now, this is a dummy login, so you don't see any here. But what it would say is if it said 1, 2, 5, however many, you click this, it would show you the families that you need to make a change on. And that change isn't necessarily always downside guardrails. It could be upside guardrail. It could be a change in a pension amount or a Social Security amount that would change other aspects of spending. So it's going to notify you when you need to take action, rather than you have to go through every single plan and look at the magnitude of how much the probability of success has changed during. It might be during an event or just during the course of normal spending, right? So it takes out a lot of the manual work of monitoring plans, especially for people taking distributions, right? Because it's one thing to be an accumulator. You don't have to monitor at so much of a frequency, but retirement is, you only get one shot at it. And you really have to pay close attention to the level at which people are spending, the level at which they planned on spending, their portfolio performance, things like that, because it's the series and the sequence of which they spend and they get returns matter so much more. So this just takes the burden of having to monitor plans completely manually. Communicated individually. So I had a lot of individual conversations. The conversations that I just kind of went through where I was showing you, like, do we need to make a change, things like that. I had a lot of those individually. And my goal is not to try to convince you that we should not be having individual conversations, but I think there's a more efficient way to do it. So I'm going to show you like kind of my bear market plan, but I think there's a way to communicate in mass to get the bulk of the information out and then have either smaller, more directed, more succinct internal one-on-one conversations. Right? Again, the point and the magnitude of the change is not defined, where in a Income Lab type plan, it would be clearly defined and the client knows that, they see it. It's hard to plan for decreasing income and budget. That's kind of like what we just went over with like kind of setting the parameters on the probability of success. And I did not, this is not like a knock on anything that uses Monte Carlo versus Income Lab style or anything. This was like my personal, is I did not have a scripted bear market plan. I think that's important. There's actually ways to, I wouldn't say get your clients excited about bear markets, but to maybe add some positivity to it. And in our next, I'm going to show you two things. So in the next webinar, when we talk about taxes, I'm going to show you what I believe is, it's probably the only original thought I ever had in my life. What I believe is an amazing way to get clients really excited about market declines, especially when it comes to like Roth conversions and things like that. I'll save that for next webinar. I'm telling you, I think it's an original idea. So I think it would be something that maybe most people are not using right now. But this bear market plan is basically at this level of decline, we are going to do this. So at 5%, we'll rebalance. At 10%, I'll send out an email referring people back to their guardrails. So say, remember, during times of market volatility, which we know are going to happen, Hunter, we know this, right? It's not if, it's when. Refer back to your guardrails, take a look at them. Let me know if you have questions, become familiar with them, become comfortable. I even make this will be in the third, maybe the third or fourth masterclass. I make a retirement plan video for everybody using like a Loom software. It's a little 5-minute video that walks through all of this, the retirement plan, the guardrails, how they work, everything like that. It's a really great reference for your clients to go back and take a look at. And then at 10%, we may expedite a partial Roth conversion. I'll talk about that a lot more next masterclass. And then there's tax loss harvesting. At down 10 to 15%, I'll do a market webinar. So everybody, we can try to just recap, and we'll do those usually typically just as often as needed while the market is declining or is depressed. Right? And of course, rebalancing, things like that. So there's a pre-scripted plan that says, okay, we're not excited necessarily about this market decline, but there's ways to at least put some positive spin on it. And I wanted to conclude with this is not, I know it may seem like it, it's definitely not a slam session on like probability of success at Monte Carlo. I still use it. I think it's a great way to plan for accumulators. I think most of them have wonderful features that are necessary, like long-term disability. Do you not have enough life insurance? All those things. So it's not my argument that this should replace probability of success, but I do believe that for distributors, it should replace how you calculate their retirement income, right? So for anybody who's decumulating, I think it's a necessary to have this supplemental, this added tool to be able to give your clients the comfort and then therefore make your firm more efficient, which makes you more profitable, more productive, whether it be more time on your hands to spend with your family, more proactive, less reactive. All those things are very important, right? So for accumulators, it clearly shows, probability of success clearly shows that doing something has a result, right? So if you save more, if you do this, if you do that, you can see that meter go up, which is training that, okay, if I do more, I see my probability go up. That's actually a great thing. It just, when you start to get into the life phase of decumulation, I don't believe it provides enough of a concrete plan for retirees to keep that anxiety out of their life. They're already anxious, big life change. They've worked for 30, 40 years and they are transitioning to a point where they're not getting a paycheck anymore. They don't have to set an alarm. There's other aspects. There's social aspects of not going to work anymore. There's what am I contributing to society? So there's a lot of emotions running, and we don't want to be the ones to add any of that. We want to take that away. So my opinion is probability of success is not for retirees. It's for everybody else. And then having just this clear, defined plan of when we need to make a change and how much that change would be really relieves a lot of the anxiety that goes into retirement, and then for someone living in retirement and actively taking distributions. I talked a lot. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll open it up for questions. We'll bring Justin back to answer the technicals. If you want to ask me anything about how I do something in the firm, go ahead and throw it out there.
Yeah, we've got a few of those for sure, Ryan, and I believe we will be there'll be a website for the masterclass, so people will be able to access slides and so on. I know several people were asking about that. We had one kind of group of technical questions I'll take super quick, and then we'll get more to the practice stuff. So people were kind of asking, where is this number from? How much can I spend number? How much would I adjust number, and so on. Although that like best guess, most likely number is at 50, typically people will actually not spend at that level, at least at the beginning of retirement. And that's because they want some buffer. So people were wondering, hey, why is that red one so much farther away than the green one? Well, that's because people are risk averse. And so there's an article on kitsis.com about this. I also put one, I think, on ThinkAdvisor about, hey, rather than success and failure, we need to think about retirement spending as, are you overspending or underspending? Right? Are you living within your means? Are you living like way too within your means? Are you living above your means? And so that's what all of the answer to all of those questions. How do you figure out how much to spend? How do you figure out when to adjust? How do you figure out the adjustment level? It's all related to, look, I'm only going to adjust down. I'm only going to take a pay cut if I'm pretty darn sure I'm overspending, right? And okay, why is it a small adjustment? Well, it's because the default is to adjust slowly, like make a small adjustment, see if that's enough. If it's not enough, do another one, right? Rather than rip the Band-Aid off, make a huge adjustment that might be an overreaction and you'll end up being whipsawed. Of course, it's possible to build a plan that way. It's just that people tend to prefer to tiptoe into pay cuts rather than take big ones. So I think that addresses a ton of these kind of more technical questions. Happy to.
Can I share something real quick, Justin?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think you guys can still see my screen, right? You should see Income Lab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is one of my favorite features because instead of just kind of modeling what a portfolio would look like during a bad time, this stress test actually models the income experience. So if we're planning for retirement, I do multiple, like many meetings with the client before they actually pull the trigger to retire, because it's a big deal, right? And more often than not, they don't end up going back to work. At least we don't want them to. So I want them to know, okay, like we don't know the future, but let's go through some really bad times in history. And yeah, we can predict what your portfolio would have done with pretty much any software. But what about your income experience? So what if I told you that you retired and the global financial crisis happened like a few months later, and horrible timing, right? That would have absolutely been a bad timing scenario if you were using Monte Carlo. But what if I told you that you had to take a pay cut? It was $410 a month, and that would last for a couple of years, and then you would be back to getting pay raises after that. How would that make you feel? And they typically say that wouldn't impact my life really that much at all. So just think about that. You may say, well, how does that small amount make a big difference? It's the same way we think about saving. We encourage people to start saving young because a little bit goes a long way. It's the same thing in retirement. If it's early retirement and they've got 30, 40 years left of retirement, a small pay cut for a finite period of time that also isn't automatically compounded after that with cost of living raises makes a huge difference in the plan. So I just wanted to share that. I think that's important.
I think that's a really good point. To any of you who have these questions about, well, is that going to be enough? What would it look like? The stress test is the place to get those questions answered. I also had people asking, well, wouldn't the guardrails change over time? Yeah, absolutely they would. I think Ryan was, showing you a kind of idealized thing not to be distracted by that. But certainly, if your guardrails aren't different 5 or 10 years from now, there's something wrong with your software, right? I mean, like your plan is totally different at that point. You're older, you're right. So, and that's true on a smaller scale month to month as well. So as you saw in that stress test, you'll see the guardrails changing as they should. All right. So we had a few folks asking, is this the presentation you use with clients, or if it's not, and I suspect it's not, what kind of deliverables or visuals do you use with them to go over this kind of approach?
So this is definitely one of the main ones, just to get them used to the concept of age-based spending and spending more early and things like that. And then I honestly just present right out of the software. I prefer to do that. I think it's more natural. It's more genuine. Like you just kind of progress through them. I'm actually going to show you later in this masterclass, like a mock presentation. Like here's how I go through everything with prospects and actual clients, because I think that's really important. Income Lab is, when I start to show you like the tax stuff in the tax lab, it's probably one of the best prospecting tools you've ever see. But so for prospects and clients, I'm going to go through in the later masterclass exactly what that looks like. But I think this one right here is a really good way to introduce them to the concept. And I can share that with everybody when we're done.
Perfect. And you may be talking about this in future sessions as well. I know we have some others on this, but you mentioned the regret zone. You mentioned kind of freedom to spend or permission to spend. Someone was asking, what do you do to kind of nudge people toward, living a life where they're spending a little closer to their spending capacity instead of kind of cowering in fear?
Well, typically the people that are more concerned also tend to, that correlation I talked about, also have really conservative risk tolerances when it comes to investment. So it's kind of, that's all in all, like that takes a little time for them to, to get them acclimated. But I think the best way is to show them what they can spend, to show them the stress test, to show them the relatively small pay cuts they would have to make if things don't go well, and to do it multiple times. Retirement confidence. When I tell somebody when they come in to talk retirement with me, my first presentation meeting, you're going to leave at like 50 to 60% confident, which is good if you started like near zero. And then as time goes on a little bit, that's going to wane. You're going to lose some. And then you come back in, I'm going to get you up to 70. And that's going to decline a little bit. And then you come back in, I'm going to get you up to 90, right? So it really is, it's a bit inefficient, but I think it's a big enough step in their life that it's worth multiple meetings, and the muscle memory of seeing this over and over again, naturally, I think drives them towards spending.
And speaking of that, do you give clients access to the Income Lab client portal? Is this something that you do just in update meetings? What do you do?
Most, I share a plan just through our file sharing software. I send them a recap email because some just want the cliff notes, like tell me the 50,000 foot view, and I don't want to see all the other stuff. Now that's not usually my clientele, they're engineers, so they want to see everything. I think the best best practices would be to share it if they have linked accounts that are tracking. If they're not linked accounts, which need to be updated pretty constantly, like so if they had held away accounts or something like that, that may be a little more challenging. So I think that's definitely on a case-by-case basis. I do firmly believe that the retirement for somebody who's retiring or retired, that 5-minute video that I make them to walk through their plan is the best piece, like the best thing I can give them.
Right, that makes sense. And how quickly is this the kind of thing, right? So Income Lab updates every month, which is just kind of a nice cadence just to make sure you're never too far out of sync. But if you did hit a lower guardrail, a red guardrail, are you, immediately calling the client? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I mean, within a few days, we'll they hit the guardrail. I have a whole process for that. So everything I have is a process, probably too much. But I initiate a workflow that's like hit a guardrail. If it sustains for a day or two, right, we'll say, okay, we're there. I will send them an email. It's kind of just a script that says, hey, you hit a guardrail, and here's my, we talked about this, right? This isn't a surprise, and here is the pay cut that we talked about, right? Just want to reiterate, let's talk about it, and then we set up a time to talk. I don't want to just adjust their pay via email, so email is just an introduction for us to have a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting thing is, if they can adjust their spending, that's great. But sometimes I've seen that there are other levers in a plan, right? Like if you say, hey, the 4-week trip to Europe is going to be 2 weeks instead, or in the future. Well, by the time we get there, it actually might be back to 4 weeks, but there are things you can move around there.
You're going to see in the best practices masterclass where I build different things into the Income Lab plan. It's almost like I think of it like features that not everybody has to have, but that do add some like redundancy and flexibility and things like that. And that's going to make a lot more sense in that third class. But it's a way for them to maybe not immediately have to take a pay cut if they hit a guardrail, because we've planned some other things in there.
Right.
Like a discretionary asset fund or stuff like that, but we'll get into those details.
Okay, last question as we wrap up here. You mentioned that you still do use probability of success and failure, although you say it's not for retirees, and I agree. How do you shift people from one to the other? Do you get any client pushback, or is this just kind of a natural thing and they get it?
No, I tell them up front now that like this is the way it is, that one of the softwares are really good at one thing and one are really good at the other. And just like, and I can equate that a million different ways metaphorically to nuclear power. So it's easy, we use this meter for this and this for that. Yeah. So probably about 4 to 5 years out is a good time to start introducing the Income Lab and running concurrently, and then purely get them on Income Lab like two years out.
Yeah, and I've heard this from many
throughout
advisors.
The duration.
I've heard this from many advisors, like the what can I spend? Here are my guardrails. I don't think anybody's ever told me they got pushback from clients.
No, never.
Just makes
never.
Sense.
As long as it's not a surprise, just introduce it up front. Hey, here's what we're going to do, and then do it. And then it's very little, if any, pushback.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan. We had several other questions. We'll go through and make sure if there are any that are very different from what we answered, we'll get those answered. But we will see you all next week. And yeah, again, just a big thank you, Ryan. That was awesome.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much for joining.